Number 13. Teresa Cachuela. Teresa Cachuela was murdered in broad daylight in December 2023. Better known to her 20,000 Instagram followers as Bunny Bontiti, the 33-year-old was gunned down in a Honolulu parking lot by her estranged husband, 44-year-old Jason Cachuela, who was also found dead from gunshot wounds later that day. Teresa had recently obtained an order of protection against Jason after their 11-year relationship soured. In her petition for the order, Teresa wrote that Jason had made threats to hurt himself and that he took her somewhere and held her at knife point. The next evening, Jason allegedly returned to Teresa's home and tried breaking in through the garage while threatening her for refusing to acknowledge him. She was shocked to find Jason still there the next morning, hiding beneath her car. A judge granted the order of protection just days later. Jason was only allowed to contact Teresa about their children, and he was required to surrender any guns he owned while the order was in effect. But it didn't stop him from getting his hands on a gun and shooting her in broad daylight. In the tragedy's aftermath, Teresa's family said that her death could have been prevented if the authorities placed a higher priority on enforcing protective orders. The slain woman's father, Stephen Johnson, told local station KITV that Teresa warned the police about her estranged husband's mental instability and his plans to hurt her. According to the family, Teresa presented law enforcement with ample evidence of the dangers Jason posed to her safety. Yet even after the order was issued, the police had failed to do any follow-up to make sure it was being followed. Teresa's loved ones are now launching an effort to inspire changes in the law which would require police to monitor people who have protective orders against them more closely. Number 12. Deborah Redden. 30-year-old three-time felon Deborah Redden was hoping to avoid prison time following his latest conviction for attempted battery with substantial bodily harm in early 2024. If the Las Vegas hearing went Redden's way, he would walk free with a probation sentence. In response to the request, Judge Mary Kay Halther said, "I think it's time he got a taste of something else because I just can't with that history." But before she could continue with what she was trying to say, Redden sprang up from his seat and tackled her, knocking the state and US flags down in the process. He could be heard shouting profanities and seen throwing punches, while numerous bystanders stepped in to pull him off of the judge. Bailiffs managed to briefly separate the parties before Redden charged at the judge again. This time he was swiftly subdued and taken back to jail. According to court documents, Redden had a history of missing court, including a hearing that was scheduled after he pleaded guilty to the case in late 2023. Going even further into his past, he had previously faced a malicious destruction of property charge and had served a year behind bars for domestic violence. Following the attack on the judge, Redden was hit with an array of new charges including battery on a protected person with substantial harm, and attempted murder. During a court hearing in February 2024, the defense brought up the issue of Redden's mental health. Redden's attorney, Carl Arnold, claimed that his client suffers from extreme paranoid schizophrenia. The defense reportedly plans to argue that Redden descended into a temporary delusional state and that he is therefore not responsible for his actions. Number 11. Zach Bowen. U.S. Army veteran Zach Bowen was still a teenager when he got a woman 10 years older than him pregnant in the late 90s. The couple married and went on to have another child, but their relationship became strained when Zach was serving overseas. After returning to the U.S., Zach got a bartending job in the famed French Quarter neighborhood of New Orleans. It was during this time in the early 2000s that he began dating a fellow bartender named Addie Hall. Both Zach and Addie were both extremely well liked by their customers and in their social circles, but they both also had demons that they were battling. Zach struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder stemming from his military service, while Addie reportedly suffered from bipolar disorder and didn't always take her medication. And they both turned to drugs and alcohol to cope, which only worsened things in ways that nobody could have predicted. As Hurricane Katrina moved through the Gulf of Mexico and encroached on the city in 2005, Zach shacked up with Addie at her apartment while leaving his ex-wife on her own to keep their two kids safe. Thankfully, they all survived the storm. And while most people were devastated by the destruction the storm caused to the city, Zach and Addie found a type of comfort in the dysfunction. It enabled them to spend their days hanging out on the street and using drugs to their heart's content without any real accountability. Life eventually returned to routine and the couple started working again. It was during this time that Zach and Addie began having major problems. Zach started cheating on Addie because he seemed to think she was being unfaithful, and their fights grew increasingly loud and nasty. The final straw came in October 2006, when Addie asked the couple's new landlord if they would draft a lease in her name only. She didn't want Zach living there, or at least wanted the power to kick him out. When Zach discovered that he had been omitted from the lease, he flew into a rage and strangled Addie to death. Unsure of how to dispose of the body without it being noticed, he spent the next several days dismembering his dead girlfriend and stuffing her body parts into pots, pans, and bags. When people began questioning Addie's absence from her workplace and around town, Zach claimed she went back to her home state of North Carolina. 11 days after Addie's murder, he went to a rooftop bar, had a few drinks, and then plunged off the edge of the building. Zach died from his injuries, and police found a note in his pocket instructing them to go to his apartment. In a case unlike any that most detectives ever see in their careers, investigators went to the address in the note and discovered the array of body parts. A pot on the stove contained Addie's head, while another pot was filled with hands and feet. Her legs were in a roasting pan, and there were additional dismembered remains in the fridge. Zach had also spray-painted a variety of strange and depressing slogans on the walls and appliances, including "I love her," "Look in the oven," and "I'm a total failure." Police found no evidence of cannibalism, despite the horrific nature of the scene. Zach also left behind a journal detailing how he very calmly strangled Addie. In one entry, he admitted to having a complete lack of remorse over murdering his girlfriend. It also stated Zach's intentions to have fun with the remaining $1,500 he had to his name, indicating that he knew the murder would eventually catch up with him. Number 10. Tyler Graves. In a terrifying act of violence that was captured mostly on camera in 2023, a California man allegedly crashed a car into his Lake Forest home and went after his roommates with a pickaxe. Identified by police as 32-year-old Tyler Graves, the suspect could also be seen striking his roommate's door repeatedly with the pickaxe. Graves continued swinging at the door for several minutes before attempting to flee the scene. He initially refused to cooperate with responding officers, prompting members of law enforcement to use less lethal beanbag shotgun rounds to get him under control. After receiving treatment at a nearby hospital for unspecified reasons, Graves was booked into the Orange County Jail on charges of assault with a deadly weapon, exhibiting a deadly weapon, resisting, obstructing, or delaying a peace officer, and violating probation. Number 9. John Brandon. Kathy Ann Jewell had a rewarding career as a flight attendant, but companionship was missing from her life. She started to crave it more as she entered her late 30s without having ever married or had children of her own. In 1989, she fell for a doctor named John Brandon while receiving treatment at his Natural Wellness Center in San Diego. Brandon was married at the time, so Kathy initially refused to get involved despite her attraction to him. But it was a game changer when Brandon told her that he was divorcing his wife. He and Kathy became a couple and moved in together, with Kathy blissfully unaware that her new boyfriend was hiding from a growing list of misconduct lawsuits and criminal charges for being a peeping Tom. At some point not too far into the relationship, Brandon's soft-spoken and patient personality did a complete 180. He became constantly paranoid that Kathy was cheating. It became extremely difficult for Kathy to continue working as a flight attendant since it involved being away from home on a regular basis. Brandon was also an alcoholic, and his overbearing and mean behavior worsened majorly when he drank. Kathy eventually got tired enough of Brandon's controlling ways to leave him. The final straw came when Brandon became convinced that Kathy was cheating on him with her gay co-worker. He threatened Kathy with a gun and fired 2 shots into her bedroom, where she locked herself in the closet all night, fearing for her life. Brandon usually stopped being violent when the booze wore off, so Kathy was hoping it would give her a chance to safely leave the house. But when she came out of her bedroom, Brandon was still sitting at the kitchen counter with a bottle of booze in his hand. He threatened to shoot Kathy's cat, so she scooped her pet up, ran out of the house, and sped away in her vehicle. Kathy moved to another city hoping for a fresh start, but Brandon kept finding ways to contact her. He pleaded with Kathy to give him another chance, promising he would quit drinking and treat her with more respect. Like many times before, Brandon kept Kathy on the hook by convincing her that they had a special connection that they wouldn't find with other people. Knowing she was going against logic, Kathy gave Brandon one more chance. Hoping for a fresh start, the couple bought a house in Gold Beach, Oregon. Kathy fell in love with the isolated property and the peace and quiet that it offered. But it wasn't an ideal place to be when Brandon decided to get drunk and threatened her with a gun one evening in 1999. Brandon assaulted Kathy for hours that night. She finally saw an opportunity to escape when he was in the bathroom and ran out of the house naked. Kathy made it to a neighbor's house and police were called to the scene. By the time officers arrived, however, Brandon had stolen Kathy's car and fled. He remained at large for years while Kathy lived in constant fear that he would track her down, even after moving and changing her name. Kathy also wanted to stop Brandon because she didn't want any more women to suffer at his hands. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened in 2007 when Brandon shot his girlfriend, 66-year-old Turid Bentley, during yet another senseless drunken rampage over nothing. Bentley died from her injuries, and a friend of the couple was permanently blinded after trying to intervene during their argument and being shot in the face. As it turned out, Brandon had evaded the authorities for the better part of a decade by living under an alias. He was also found dead at the scene, and while Kathy felt disappointed that the authorities weren't able to stop him before he killed Bentley, the good news was that he would never harm an innocent person again. Number 8. Luther Bass. Mother of 4, Anita Bass wasn't looking for love when she attended a family activities group for single parents and their kids during the early 1990s. She had already been through a few toxic relationships, including an abusive marriage, and did not want to risk ending up in another. But love almost never happens with perfect timing, and Anita slowly reopened her mind to dating after meeting father of 2, Keith Young, and finding him impossible not to like. Unlike her past partners, Keith treated Anita with utmost respect. He didn't pressure her to be in a relationship, and he was good to her children, who took an instant liking to him. First, the 2 single parents became best friends. As Anita's trust in Keith grew, so did her feelings. They married in 1991, and Keith moved into Anita's Largo, Florida home with his children. Finally, Anita had the type of loving relationship and stable home she always dreamed of for both herself and her kids. It was the happiest she had ever been. That newfound happiness was snatched away in December 1991 when a masked assailant broke into the family's house at 3 a.m. and attacked the couple with an axe. Anita survived with a deep cut to her throat after fighting the intruder off with a baseball bat and running to a neighbor for help. Keith died from his injuries. Police knew that the family had not experienced a conventional home invasion when they discovered that the phone lines had been cut from outside. Someone went there with the intention of making sure their victims died, and robbery did not appear to be a motive. Investigators turned their attention to Anita's ex-husband and the father of 3 of her kids, Luther Bass, who lived in Idaho. Their divorce had been contentious, and Bass was furious when he learned that Anita had married Keith. Bass had also recently threatened to kidnap their children despite Anita having primary legal custody of the kids. He also complained about paying child support. The escalating tensions had reached a fever pitch in the weeks before the home invasion when Anita refused to let Bass take the children camping. She noticed that Bass and his girlfriend had loaded their truck up with a lot more belongings than they would need for a weekend in the woods, leading Anita to suspect that the couple planned to make good on Bass's threats to abduct the children. After that incident, Bass decided that Anita needed to die so he could have the kids to himself and get out of paying child support. His girlfriend Connie helped back up his alibi for several months before she came forward and admitted that Bass had gone to Florida on the weekend of Keith's murder. Connie said that she begged Bass to let go of his need for revenge, but he refused. During questioning, Bass admitted to killing Keith and said that Anita was the intended target, stating in his own words, "I have nothing against Keith, but you made your bed, you're gonna die in it." He was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life without parole. Number 7. Bryn Speecher. Many people think of marijuana as a peaceful and harmless drug, but some unlucky individuals have adverse reactions to THC. 32-year-old Bryn Speecher was an inexperienced pot smoker when she took a few hits of weed with her boyfriend, Chad O'Melia, in 2018. Bryn and Chad had only recently started dating. They were still getting to know each other, and Bryn had only used marijuana a handful of times throughout her life. In fact, she had gone out of her way to avoid it as a teenager, at one point cutting ties ties with a group of friends who had started using it. Bryn and Chad were at his apartment in Thousand Oaks, California when they smoked together that day. It wasn't long before Bryn descended into psychosis and attacked Chad. She stabbed her boyfriend over 100 times, killing him at the scene. She had also hurt her dog and herself, and she was still inflicting damage on her own face when police arrived. Bryn didn't stop until she was hit several times with a police baton. Authorities charged the young woman with murder. In court, the defense argued that Bryn had suffered marijuana-induced psychosis. It might seem like a laughable concept to some, but it's a real thing. Even the prosecution agreed after the defense brought an expert in to testify. According to the Ventura County District Attorney's Office, Bryn began seeing and hearing things that weren't there after taking her second hit. She was also suddenly compelled to believe that she was dead and that she had to kill Chad in order to bring herself back to life. Tensions were high as supporters from both sides filled the courtroom, with Chad's loved ones accusing Bryn of showing no remorse and being a cold-blooded killer. Meanwhile, Bryn's closest friends rallied around her based on their belief that she would never hurt someone in a sober state of mind. It's understandable that Chad's friends and family wanted to see his killer punished. As one family friend pointed out, Bryn chose to use marijuana after trying it in the past and previously deciding that it wasn't for her, and many people believe that a person should be held responsible for their drunk and high behavior based on their decision to use in the first place. Bryn was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, and in a shocking twist, the court spared her from prison time. In early 2024, she was sentenced to 100 hours of community service, and as long as she completes it, she'll be off the hook for the crime. Number 6. Richard Sotka. 48-year-old Richard Sotka hadn't been dating 58-year-old Rhonda Kagelski for very long when he moved into her Green Bay, Wisconsin home in early 2023. But the new living arrangement took a horrifying turn one day when Richard entered the apartment and allegedly found Rhonda being intimate with her best friend, 53-year-old Paula O'Connor. Richard flew into an uncontrolled rage and proceeded to stab both women to death. He was long gone from the scene by the time the bodies were discovered, but police were quick to identify him as a suspect. At the time, Richard was on a GPS ankle monitor for an unrelated stalking and harassment case, but he had cut the device off and skipped town, and his current whereabouts were anyone's guess. Authorities tracked Richard to Arkansas through his vehicle's OnStar GPS system. During questioning, he allegedly admitted to killing Rhonda and Paula. Richard said that he felt embarrassed by what was going on when he entered the room. He claimed that one of the women told him to leave, causing him to snap. During the interview, Sotka revealed that he had gone to prison 21 years earlier for snapping on a woman he was dating at the time. He admitted to knocking out several of the victim's teeth, fracturing her skull, and breaking her leg. When asked what brought him to Arkansas, he reportedly said he wanted to take one last drive before he inevitably lost his freedom. In early 2024, a jury found Sotka guilty of 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, which carries a mandatory life sentence without parole in Wisconsin. Number 5. Alec Manassian. On a sunny spring day in April 2018, a rental van barreled into a crowd on a busy Toronto sidewalk, killing 11 people and injuring at least 16 others. The force of the impact sent victims flying up to 26 feet in the air. It was the biggest vehicle ramming attack in Canadian history. The driver, 25-year-old Alec Manassian, was a self-proclaimed incel. Short for involuntary celibate, the term represents a growing mostly male subculture that justifies a hatred for women based on past rejection and a sense of entitlement to the female body. It was likely no coincidence that most of the victims of the attack were women. Manassian had picked up the rental van about an hour earlier for the express purpose of using it in a terrorist attack. After ramming it into the crowd, he tried provoking the police to shoot him by acting like he had a gun. But a keen-eyed officer, Constable Ken Lamb, noticed that the object in the suspect's hand wasn't a gun, and he managed to subdue Manassian without firing his own weapon. Lamb would later receive praise for staying calm and rational during a high-pressure situation, and for not immediately resorting to gunfire. Manassian had no criminal record until that day, which, from a conventional standpoint, made him an unlikely candidate for such large-scale violence. But like many other misogynistic lone wolves, he flew under the radar until he did something major. Shortly before the attack, Manassian posted a tribute to notorious incel incel Elliot Rodger on Facebook. On what became known as the Isla Vista killings, Rodger went on a killing spree that ended with 6 people dead in 2014. Following the murders, the incel movement gained a disturbing amount of momentum, with many subscribers to the culture hailing Rodger as a hero. Manassian was no different, and he was apparently so inspired by Rodger's cowardice, unprovoked violence that he chose to carry out his own version of it. In addition to being motivated by an irrational hatred toward women and conventionally attractive men, it was also evident that Manassian wanted notoriety. But he also refused to give a straight story on exactly what his motives were for the attack, and he wasn't even tough enough to get through basic training before he dropped out of the Canadian Armed Forces, proving that he's not the tough guy he tries to portray himself as. The court found Manassian guilty on all charges, including 10 counts of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Throughout the trial, the defense argued that Manassian lacked an understanding between right and wrong because he's on the autism spectrum. The judge was quick to shut these claims down during Manassian's sentencing hearing, noting that the defendant acted knowingly, and because the judge knew Manassian wanted attention for his horrific crime, she also refused to address him by name throughout the entire case, simply referring to him as John Doe. Number 4. Eileen Bright. The quiet community of Mays Landing, New Jersey, was recently shaken by the disturbing murder of 81-year-old Gary Johnson on Easter Sunday in 2024. He was beaten and stabbed to death inside his home in a senior living community where a visiting nurse discovered his remains. His head was riddled with injuries and covered with blood. Investigators traced the crime to 75-year-old Eileen Bright, who is now facing charges of first-degree murder, unlawful possession of a weapon, and possession of a weapon for an unlawful purpose. Both Johnson and Bright were living in the home when the deadly disagreement occurred. According to court documents, they were boyfriend and girlfriend. A neighbor told the Courier Post that Bright had been heard threatening to kill Johnson, and she allegedly flat-out admitted to someone that she had committed the crime. She also confessed during police questioning and is being held at the Atlantic County Jail without bail. Neighbor Joe Morris told Fox 29 that Johnson suffered from a lot of health problems and that Bright helped take care of him. Based on what he heard from other community members, Morris said it sounded like Bright had gotten tired of being Johnson's caretaker and snapped. The outcome of the case remains to be seen. Number 3. Matthew Hinrichsen. Matthew Hinrichsen of Ewing, Nebraska began dating Victoria Lee in 2009. 2 years later, the couple moved into the basement of Hinrichsen's parents' home. Victoria lived at the residence for a little over a year before her relationship with Hinrichsen devolved into an on-again, off-again status. She began spending time with Gabino Vargas, who worked and lived on a dairy farm just a few miles from Hinrichsen's home. Victoria and Gabino married in October 2012. About a week later, Victoria finally moved the remainder of her belongings out of Hinrichsen's house. She also told her ex-boyfriend that she had married Gabino, apparently unaware that she was lighting the fuse on a loose cannon. Hinrichsen would later claim that his romantic involvement with Victoria continued after she married Gabino. In the meantime, he became a ticking time bomb. About a month after learning about Victoria's marriage, Hinrichsen bought an AK-47 and ammunition to go with it. 8 days later, he spent an entire evening drinking at local bars before leaving at around midnight. Less than 20 minutes later, Victoria dialed 911 to report that there was someone with a gun lurking around the house that she and Gabino shared. In the background, the dispatcher could hear Hinrichsen swearing at Victoria and telling her that she was going to die. The call disconnected, but it wasn't long before another call came in to report that Victoria and Gabino's trailer was on fire. The couple's murdered remains were found inside the burning dwelling. In the driveway, police noticed that someone had deliberately rammed Victoria's car. About an hour after leaving the bar, Hinrichsen showed up naked at his parents' home with the AK-47 in his hand. He threatened his father, who managed to wrestle the gun out of his hands. By the time police arrived, Hinrichsen had put on a plastic rain poncho. In an attempt to destroy evidence, Hinrichsen was burning the outfit he had committed the murders in. He was charged with murder and chose to take his chance on a jury. During his trial, Hinrichsen admitted that he had gotten upset when he saw that Victoria had changed her last name to Vargas on social media. He denied going to the property with the intention to kill the couple, claiming that he only meant to scare Gabino into moving away from the property. But he flew into an uncontrollable rage when he saw that Victoria was home because she had told him she was going out of town that evening. Unable to contain his anger, Hinrichsen barged into the house and bludgeoned Victoria to death with the barrel and butt of his gun while she cowered in a corner trying to call for help. He then killed Gabino and lit the house ablaze because he didn't want to leave behind a gruesome scene. Hinrichsen was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 gun charges. He was sentenced to life in prison and had a parole hearing scheduled for 2034. Number 2. Romello Randall. An ordinary Monday morning at a California courthouse took an unexpected turn in March 2024 when a defendant managed to free himself from his restraints without anyone noticing. 28-year-old Romello Darrell Randall grabbed his defense attorney's pen and stabbed the lawyer in the face and head with it. He then tried to rush at the prosecutor but was tackled by a courtroom deputy. After the chaos died down, court officials found a handwritten note Randall had penned before the attack, which simply said, "Sorry." Randall's lawyer and the deputy district attorney sustained minor injuries, and the court proceedings were expected to continue as scheduled. Defense attorney Matthew Frege told the Mercury News that it was no big deal. The incident occurred during Randall's trial on a murder charge. He was accused of conspiring to kill the mother of his child, 24-year-old Johnay Laquelle Bridges, with help from an accomplice named Christopher Slaughter. Slaughter took a plea deal and is serving a 15-year sentence, while Randall chose to take his chances on a jury. According to investigators, Randall affixed a tracking device to the victim's car and followed her to a convenience store where she was shot dead in the parking lot in 2020. A second victim survived with injuries. During Randall's trial, prosecutors introduced an ample supply of evidence against him, including fingerprints, text messages, and the GPS devices he used to stalk Bridges. The defendant's most recent courtroom outburst certainly wasn't the first display of its kind throughout the case. During cross-examination in November 2022, Randall went on a verbal tirade against Deputy District Attorney Kevin Bell. He also told the judge to shut up, adding, "I'm not your B," and tried to punch his previous defense attorney in the face. Fed up with the defendant's antics, Judge Charles Ben Birch declared a mistrial and banned Randall from acting as his own lawyer in future proceedings. It certainly didn't stop Randall from continuing to run his mouth, including after closing arguments when he threatened to slaughter the jury if they found him guilty. For good measure, Randall followed up the threat by making gun gestures with his hand and saying, "Pop, pop, pop." Undeterred by the warning, the jury found him guilty of murder, conspiracy to commit a crime, possessing an assault weapon, and shooting at a motor vehicle. Randall is due for sentencing in late April 2024. We have another great video lined up right after number 1. If you need more of a daily world list dosage, then be sure to stay tuned if you haven't seen that one yet. Number 1. Neil Entwistle. While studying abroad in college, US national Rachel Souza fell for a British man named Neil Entwistle. By all appearances, Entwistle was a great catch. He was educated, clean-cut, and appeared to be on a successful path. He and Rachel married in 2003 and had a child 2 years later. A few months after their daughter was born, the couple moved to Massachusetts to be near Rachel's family. They lived with her parents at first, and Neil was welcomed into the family with open arms. Rachel's mom and dad thought highly of their son-in-law, who seemed like a devoted husband and father who put his family first. Neil and Rachel eventually moved into a nice rental home for $2,700 per month. That was a lot of money back in the 2000s, and this is one of the many things that Neil secretly went tens of thousands of dollars into debt over, for the sake of appearing successful when he actually wasn't. In reality, Neil was unemployed and had no promising job prospects lined up. In addition to financing the family's lifestyle on credit, he scammed people online by accepting payments for website building services and never providing the promised product in return. Meanwhile, Neil had Rachel and her family under the impression that he had money in an offshore account that he was living off of while he looked for a job in the US. Rachel's loved ones were rocked by sudden tragedy they never would have expected in 2006. After not hearing from Rachel for a few days, friends and family had grown concerned for her well-being. It wasn't like her to fall out of touch for that long. While performing a welfare check at Rachel and Neil's home, police found Rachel dead in her bedroom. Neil was nowhere to be found. found. Detectives soon discovered that he had bought a plane ticket and flown to England just hours after Rachel's murder, taking no luggage with him. The police in Massachusetts gave Neil a call so he could explain his side of things. He said he panicked after walking in on the carnage. More specifically, Neil said he walked into the house and noticed that the victims had been shot, something that not even the crime scene investigators knew until an autopsy was performed. This was just one of several things pointing toward Neil's involvement, along with DNA evidence, and he was extradited to the US to face 2 counts of murder, a gun charge and an ammunition charge. Prosecutors argued that Neil snapped when he could no longer find ways to fake the appearance of a middle-class lifestyle. After all, you can't live on borrowed money forever, especially without a way to pay it back. It would have only been a matter of time before Rachel and her family discovered that Neil was living a lie. In 2008, he was convicted as charged and sentenced to life without parole. Entwistle has challenged his case numerous times with the support of his parents, who insist their son is innocent. But not many other people seem to think that Neil was falsely convicted, including the court, which has upheld its original ruling through every one of his appeals so far.
10. Throwing a puppy. A white woman in California was busted racially abusing a man and then throwing a puppy at him. As if hurling racial insults at somebody isn't horrific enough, the young Karen went ahead and abused an animal as well, using a living puppy as a weapon. The video was recorded in 2020, showing the irate woman losing her mind at a local California rapper named Glomula. It's not clear exactly what started the bizarre interaction. When he started recording, the woman was walking towards him through the middle of the street as he had simply been trying to get back into his car. She yelled at him, "You're black," for seemingly no reason, and that was when everything spiraled out of control. The two got into an argument. The rapper became concerned that she was holding the puppy in a really unsafe way, and then she kicked him and tossed the dog in his face. It was incredibly bizarre, and the woman didn't really appear to know what was happening or even where she was. Then just as quickly as she had attacked a random man unprovoked, she ran off down the street. Her face is all over the internet and she's probably lost all her friends, while Glomula got himself a cute new puppy. So in the end, it all really worked out. 9. Jennifer Couture. Jennifer Couture is the insane Florida woman who went viral in early 2022 when she tried to run somebody over with her car outside a Dunkin' Donuts. The video was first shared on TikTok, with Jennifer, a blonde white woman who may or may not have fake eyebrows and fake lips, clearly seen exiting her black Mercedes and then attacking the unidentified person filming. Jennifer can be heard telling the person to relax, to chill out with their attitude, and then she tried to snatch the phone from the other woman's hand. The victim screamed out, "Ah, you just assaulted me!" And then Jennifer mocks the woman and returns to her Mercedes SUV. But this wasn't the end of the interaction. Jennifer then tried to back her SUV over the woman who was filming her. Her attempt failed, but she still tried to run a stranger over. She has since been charged with 2 counts of assault with a deadly weapon. 2 counts because after she failed the first time to run the woman over, she tried again. As for why Jennifer turned full Karen, we don't know all the details. It seems to have been over some frivolous disagreement in the parking lot of the donut shop. 8. Hot soup. On November 7, 2021, Amanda Martinez threw hot soup in the face of a manager at a restaurant. She did it because she was angry that her plastic lid had melted. Amanda was so furious about the poor quality of her lid that she tried to scald somebody's face off. The disturbing moment was caught on surveillance footage inside the Sol de Jalisco restaurant in Temple, Texas. Amanda demanded to speak with the manager, a typical Karen move. Then when manager Janelle Brolin tried to de-escalate the situation, Amanda tried her hardest to keep it escalating. After a whole lot of yelling, Amanda threw the steaming hot soup directly in the 24-year-old manager's face. Keep in mind, this was soup so hot it melted the plastic lid of the container. It wasn't just hot enough to burn your lips, it would have burned your whole tongue off. The manager described the feeling of the soup hitting her in the face like taking a full stream of pepper spray straight to the eyes. It was so hot that her eyes burned and she got an instant nosebleed. By the time the police arrived, Amanda was long gone. But just days later, an arrest warrant was issued and she was booked into the Bell County Jail. If found guilty on the charge of assault, Amanda will be looking at around 1 year in jail and $4,000 in fine. 7. Taser Karen. Just before the end of 2020, a white woman did something so outrageous, she earned herself the Karen of the Year award. It happened in California and involved an old woman, a taser, and a poodle. The incident was recorded by Discovery Bay woman Jerry L's security cameras and on her cell phone. You see, the old woman walked up to the front door of Jerry L's house with a taser in her hand. When Jerry L's brother opened the door to see what she wanted, the woman immediately lashed out. She claimed that their pit bull had attacked her dog and then proceeded to berate them for being black. This woman literally said, "You're a black person in a white neighborhood, and you're really acting like one. Why don't you act like a white person if you're going to live in a white neighborhood?" It was pretty terrible, but it got worse. The family asked if she would please leave, and she refused. She insisted that the family dog had attacked her dog, even though her dog was perfectly fine. Then she started rambling about her top secret clearance level and informing the family that they're all going to hell. She did eventually leave, but the whole thing left Jerry L and her family shaken and feeling unwanted in a neighborhood where they had been living for the last 10 years. 6. Home Depot Karen. Terry Lynn Wright was arrested for the second time in 6 days when she trespassed at a Texas Home Depot and refused to wear her mask in 2021. The incident at the Home Depot happened less than a week after the incident that originally shot her to fame at a Bank of America in Galveston on March 11. The 65-year-old white woman apparently didn't learn much from the first incident, in which she got kicked out of the bank for being maskless. She tried to walk into the Home Depot also without putting on a mask, and when employees asked her to leave, she refused. At about this time in the pandemic, store employees were pretty much done dealing with Karens. They phoned the police right away and let them deal with the situation. The cops told Terry that she would go to jail for trespassing if she didn't leave immediately, to which Terry replied that she was well within her federal rights and that the police officer was actually in violation of the law. It was about that time Terry was put into handcuffs and put into a patrol car. It was as she was being put into the car that the officer can be heard on his body cam saying, "Oh, you're the lady who was causing issues in Galveston the other day." She replied with, "No, I was the lady the other day following my rights." At the end of the day, this Karen didn't do much to get her into trouble. We didn't hear about any other incidents, so she hopefully learned her lesson after 2 strikes. 5. Amy Cooper. Amy Cooper is the white woman who called the police when she came across a bird watcher in the park who happened to have black skin. She was walking through Central Park in New York on Memorial Day 2020. She was in a wooded area of the park where dogs are required to be leashed. Amy Cooper did not have a dog on its leash, and Christian Cooper, the name's totally coincidental, asked if she could please leash her animal. It wasn't an outrageous request. Nonetheless, Amy flipped out. She ordered Christian to stop recording her as he pulled his phone out to document the interaction. She also threatened to call the cops, then really did call them and proceeded to lie to the authorities on camera. She said to the cops that there was an African-American man with a bicycle helmet who was threatening her and her dog. Then, for absolutely no reason, Amy began to scream into her phone as if she was about to be kidnapped. She went off like a crazy person, screeching to send the cops immediately because she was in mortal danger. It was all quite strange and a huge overreaction, and Amy's life took a pretty hard downward turn afterward. In an interview with CNN, Amy tried to defend her actions by saying she wasn't a racist, but the damage was already done. After the video surfaced online, she was fired from her job at her investment firm. 4. Hate crime Karen. At a protest taking place at the Hartford Capitol building back in 2021, Yulia Gilstein, a 45-year-old white woman, spat on a black female activist. As you can imagine, the activist was pretty upset. The whole incident was caught on video, with Yulia heard screaming, "All lives matter," just before she hawked a loogie at Karen Prescott, the founder of Power Up Manchester. Police arrested the older woman almost immediately, and she was promptly charged with breach of the peace. But that wouldn't be the end of her story. Spitting on a black woman at a protest got her charges upgraded to a hate crime, as well as to third-degree attempt to commit assault. Not wanting to go to jail, Yulia made a dramatic apology at her court hearing and called her actions completely out of character. In other words, the same defense every Karen in the history of Karens has ever given. But what upset her victim even more than the act itself was the fact that Yulia didn't get much more than a slap on the wrist. She was ordered to complete 100 hours of anti-hate education over 2 years and then let go. 3. White woman with a gun. The employee of a Mississippi campground was fired from her job at the beginning of summer of 2019 for pulling out a gun on a couple who were trying to have a picnic. The woman with the gun happened to be white, while the couple happened to be black. The woman's name is Ruby Nellie Howell, and she was 70 years old at the time of her bizarre public freakout. It happened on May 26th, and the whole thing was caught on video. Ruby approached Franklin and Jessica Richardson, who were looking for a nice picnic spot and perhaps a cabin on the edge of Oktibbeha County Lake. They looked like a totally ordinary couple, just out and about with their family dog. Yet Ruby marched straight up to them with a handgun in her fist and told them to leave immediately. She said they didn't have a reservation, even though she never asked about a reservation. She couldn't possibly have known their situation. She simply saw a black couple and decided to pull out a gun and chase them off the property. Thankfully, Ruby was caught in the act, and considering she'd been working at the campground for quite some time, this probably wasn't the first time something like this had happened. It just so happened to be the first time somebody captured it on video. Ruby was fired the second that video went public and was arrested by the Oktibbeha County Sheriff's Office and charged with threatening exhibition of a weapon. But as you can probably guess, she was released on a bond of only $500 and let go the same day. 2. The Spirit Airlines Karen. On September 11, 2021, a white woman decided to commemorate the anniversary of the terror attacks in New York City by being racist on an airplane. The victim of this particular Karen has been identified as Acha Torre, a woman who happens to be both black and Muslim. Acha claims that while on a Spirit Airlines flight which just landed in Detroit, the Karen singled her out and launched a rather aggressive verbal assault. It all started after an older woman dropped her luggage and it accidentally hit the Karen. This caused her to fly off the handle, first screaming at the older woman who had dropped her luggage, a woman who was old enough to be her mother, before lashing out at Acha Torre. She screamed, totally unprovoked, at Acha to mind her own business, and also called her a Muslim terrorist. She worked herself up into such a frenzy that she physically attacked Acha, despite a number of passengers filming her with their phones. The police came and took the Karen off the airplane and charged her with assault and disorderly conduct. But that's not enough for Acha. According to the Detroit Free Press, Acha is now trying to charge the woman with a hate crime for spewing anti-Muslim rhetoric during a physical assault. 1. The Case of the Two Karens. The case of the two Karens is a little different and a little strange. It started years ago in 2013 when a woman named Karen Y. Clark had her identity stolen by another woman named Karen A. Clark. Karen A. convinced Karen Y. to hand over her personal information to help build her credit score. But instead of doing that, Karen A. used that information to rent an apartment and to commit financial crimes throughout Missouri. You could call Karen A. Clark the ultimate Karen, a truly slimy human being. She used the information from the other Karen to steal money, to commit fraud, to commit forgery, and to rob her former employer of about $30,000. Instead of helping to boost Karen Y's credit score, she ran it into the ground. She took out as many loans as she possibly could, rented places and trashed them, and was just generally awful for 8 long years. It wasn't until 2021 that police finally picked her up and charged Karen A. with identity theft. The police were able to identify at least 7 aliases that she used throughout her life as an identity thief. She went by names like Karen Ann Kendall, Karen Lavinia Clark, and Karen Vinewald. She may have been a clever con artist, but she couldn't seem to come up with any better names than Karen.
Thanks for watching. Which version of snapping would be less embarrassing? Saying something cruel and totally out of line to an annoying coworker in the presence of others, or having an overly dramatic public meltdown over something trivial like a barista getting your coffee order wrong? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.